is Logan Ballard.
Grandma.
I was born in 1936. This is my wife, Margie.
I was born in 1937 in January.
Okay. So, first things first, what was your childhood like?
I had seven kids in our family, and my mom didn't work, and my dad was on disability Social Security at the time, so we were a poor family. We didn't have a lot of goods, but we had plenty of food to eat, and Mom made our clothes, and we were very happy. And I loved my brothers and my sisters.
Okay. What about you, Grandpa? What was your childhood like?
Well, my childhood was pretty good. I was next to the youngest in the family. I had brother Ralph and sister Ruth, brother Orville, and sister Mary, older than me, and I had another sister Judy, younger than me. So I was kind of in the middle. I was born to twin, but my twin died at birth.
What kind of things did you guys used to do for fun?
We used to play games outside mostly. We used to play pom-pom pull away, and we used to play, Ring Around the Rosie, and one of the things that nobody seems to play anymore was we used to play on the maples over at the school, and that was a lot of fun. Swing on the maples, that's one of our favorite things to play on is at the school grounds.
What about you, Grandma?
We used to play out in the field. We had a big goat field, and we had a woods where we went to pick strawberries, and we'd get our hands picked up with the strawberry plants. But we used to have a lot of fun. We'd have a cage in the backyard, and we'd make a house. And I was always Roy Rogers, and I used to have a girlfriend named Dale Evans, and we used to play cowboys.
Oh, that's cute. Okay. During World War II, what type of things changed in your family due to the war?
Well, there was a lot of stamps that you had to have for all your food. But I had an Uncle Mike who had put away a lot of sugar, and he had thousands and thousands of pounds of sugar because he owned 5 A&W root beer stands, and he used the sugar to make the root beer. And I don't know if he knew about the war coming on, but he had bought a lot of sugar and had it in a warehouse before the war, so we never was without sugar. He raised his own beef, and so he used to bring us meat from his farm and give it to us, so we weren't too bad off as far as having the stamps to get the food, because you didn't have to have stamps if you raised your own food. And since Uncle Mike raised it, he just dropped it off at our house for us. Just before the war came, my mother ordered some large barrels of candy from Sears and Roebuck, and they were 55-gallon drums of candy, which lasted us throughout the war, which we shared with our neighbors all during the war. When they couldn't get sugar or get any candy, we would share our candy with them. So things weren't too bad during the war, although we did have one very scary incident that during an air raid thing, when they had the air raid sirens going, all of a sudden there was a great big explosion, and we thought we were being bombed, but it was really the Reichel Chemical Company in Ferndale blowing up, which happened quite often. But the explosion was so bad it shook the windows and houses for miles around. Everybody thought that we were being bombed at the time.
Well, you, Grandma, is there anything you can remember about World War II that changed family?
Well, we were like I say, a poor family, but we used to make potato sandwiches with raw potatoes, and our neighbors used to go up to a dump, and they pick up this hard candy in packages, which they give it to us, and we thought we were rich. We thought that was really yummy. And other than that, we always had some kind of food to eat. We didn't have the fancy food, but we had the good food. And we were a very happy family.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, so next question is, what was it like as a young girl in the workplace?
Well, when I was younger, I was 12 years old. I worked on a farm with my sister, and it was Young's farm. And on the farm, there was a young lad that later became my sister's husband. And we used to work like 10 hours a day, weeding and hoeing, and we would get paid, and every time it rained, we could go shopping, because that's the only time we worked 6 days a week, and we had the day off that it rained. So that was a real treat to go shopping and spend our $15 a week, our 25 cents an hour, which we thought was fantastic. We'd ride our bikes out to the farm, and then my dad had a car, but the radiator didn't work, and he'd take us out to the farm, and every time he'd get there, the radiator would explode, and he'd have to fill up the radiator so he could get back home. But we thought it was fun.
Did you work anywhere else?
I babysat. I watched these 2 kids on the weekends, and there again, I remember doing something which I shouldn't have done, which was fun. That after the kids went to bed, I always used to look in their cupboards for treats, and I'd find some kind of sweet treat way up in the top of the cupboard, and so I would snitch some of that, which was yummy.
Didn't you work for a printing company?
And then when I was 15, I worked for a printer, and I babysat his kids, and then later I worked in his print shop. And that's where I met my Larry. He worked at the print shop too. And we were just 15 then. And we worked at this print shop for Hazel Park Printing. And that's really how we met.
How do you, Grandpa, what were your first jobs?
Well, I went in business when I was 7. My brother brought me a printing press. And I set up the printing press, and I used to print. The first job I ever printed was for a fellow named Al Barr. He was a magician, and I printed some cards up for him. He was 10 at the time, and I was 7, and he would do magical programs for people, and he'd pass out these business cards. Well, I continued to print his cards for many, many years. Al finally became the dean of a college, and even when he was the dean of the college, I was still doing printing for him. I printed for him from the time I was 7 until he died, which I was his printer all my life, I guess. But later on, I took up printing in high school, and we didn't have very modern equipment at high school, so they used to send the children from high school out to real print shops to work in order to get experience. And I worked at Hazel Park Printing, and I started out as a comp, they used to call it, setting type from type cases. We used to do a lot of wedding invitations. And after I worked at Hazel Park Printing, I got a job at Malabar Printing and moved there, and at that time I was running presses. I started out originally as a truck driver, being a delivery boy, but then I got into running printing presses. And that's when Margie moved to the job I was. She left Hazel Park Printing and came to Malabar Printing. And at Malabar Printing, I met a fellow named John Cross, who left Malabar and went to Gell Printing down in Detroit. And he kept insisting that I come down there. But I had kind of a stigmatism, I guess you'd call it, for going down to Detroit, because my mother had always told us never to go south of 8 Mile because that's where the black people were. And she didn't want us to go down to Detroit. So all my teenage life, I never went into the city of Detroit. And even when I was offered a job there, I didn't want to work there.
I'm going to cut you off because we're going to come back to it, okay? So, on average, what age should people in your generation get married?
Well, some got married at 15. Some of our kids in high school got married when they were just in their teens. And my older sister went to Louisiana, and she got married at 16, and her husband was 18. But then, I guess if you went to Louisiana, you could get married. Other than that, you had to be 18 with parental consent.
Okay. Was it, since you guys got married at 21, was that an average age?
21 was a good age, you know. But like I say, a lot of our friends in school got married younger.
Okay. What was school like? What were the grades like? Like, what kind of classes did you take?
I liked music, and I always was in choir, and I always liked math classes. I was real good at math. I was a real sharp person at math. Now, history, I did not like. That was my harder subject. But other than that, I was a good student at school. I got real high grades.
Were there any classes you weren't allowed to take because you were a girl?
No.
No?
No. I didn't. Well, I never took chemistry, and I never took, what is it, sociology or any of those? Biology. They weren't required, and I never took any of them.
Okay. What about you, Grandpa?
I took about the opposite she took. I took chemistry. And biology. And most of my interest was in the printing in school. I also had an interest in acting, and I spent almost every year at school in some way or another in acting in plays. Quite often I'd even, in one-act plays, I'd be in all 3 plays at once. And when I graduated from high school, I was awarded a letter in acting. It was also giving a lifetime membership in the Thespian organization. And right after leaving high school, I had a lot of offers from the television stations wanting me to be in television, but my mother was against that, and I was never allowed to go into that type of work.
Okay. So, what, grades did they go to? How old were you when you started elementary school, when you went to middle school, high school, so on?
I started kindergarten at 5, and in the 3rd grade, I had a lot of problems, and I was taken out of 3rd grade, and I had to go down to the office, and I stayed in the office from 3rd grade to 6th grade, and my teacher was the principal of the Clark Elementary School, and when I was after leaving 6th grade, I went to junior high for 2 years, no, actually 1 year, and they moved us from junior high to high school.
In 8th grade?
In 8th grade, no, 7th grade. 8th grade, they moved us back to junior high. In 9th grade, they put us back in high school. And then we skipped the 11, I think it was 11B. We used to, our grades were divided into 2 grades. You had like 8A and 8B, A and B of each grade, so it was like a half year of each one. And we decided to skip school, skip a grade. So we went to summer school for several years and skipped 11th.
Did Grandma skip 11th with you?
Yeah, almost our whole class did.
Yeah, we had a class of 200, and about half of us skipped like the 12B and went to the 12A, and we graduated in June when we were supposed to graduate the following January.
Okay. And do you remember your first car or your first color TV?
I remember my brother getting a black and white TV. It was like 12 by 12. It was so little that we could barely see it, but boy, did we enjoy it. It was really, really nice, but it was only like 12 by 12, and it was huge. It had a long, big train on the back of it. It was really an odd thing, but it was really fun. We used to go to the neighbor's house and watch TV. Watch Arthur Godfrey.
Okay. And how did religion have an influence on your life?
I was 9 and a half before I ever went to church. And a neighbor lady was teaching a neighborhood Bible club. And the lady behind me, her son used to come and pick her up for church. And she said, well, Marge, why don't you come to church with me? And I said, well, I don't have any way because we didn't have a car at the time. And so she invited me to go with her, and her son used to come and pick us up and take us to church. And I really enjoyed it. But my dad very much opposed me going to church. And he really didn't want me to, but I was a stubborn kid. And I told him I was going anyway, so then he used to wake me up on Sunday mornings to go to church. And I'd go to church with a neighbor. And I really enjoyed it.
And then you became a Sunday school teacher, which you did for a long time, right?
Then I worked years later when I was 15 with preschool kids for many, many years. And I taught them, and I loved them, and I always felt parents could go to church if I played with their kids.
Okay. For you, Grandpa, what was church? What was your church? What did religion influence you in your life?
Well, I started church in the cradle roll, so I was just a baby when I went to church. And I grew up in church, and when I was about 12 or 13, I decided I didn't want to go to church anymore. So I stayed away from church for a while until one day Margie asked me to come to church. And I went to church, and we were in youth group together. We used to have a large youth group at our church, and the evening service was mostly made up of youth. We had youth singing in the choir. In fact, the youth used to run the whole evening service. And at that time, we had a group called VCY, Voice of Christian Youth. They used to meet down at the Masonic Temple in Detroit. And it was every other Saturday we'd meet, and there'd be about 3,000 children show up. And teenagers. We used to drive down there, and it made a good time to go for a date with your girlfriend. And the VCY had lots of funds, and they would rent the Bobble boat and take it on cruises up through Lake Huron. And it would be like a moonlight cruise. We'd be out real late at night on the Bobble boats. And so it had quite an influence in our life. And we met in church. First we met at the shop, and then we went to church together until I worked with Margie, actually, and with the children. And we eventually got married. Every time we'd go out on a date, she'd take her brother with her. And by the time we got married, everybody was saying, well, it's about time you got married. Everybody thought her brother was one of our kids.
He was, 8 years older? He was 13 years younger than me. And he was such a cute little guy that I kind of just took him under my wings, and I watched him, and I loved him, and my mom worked. My dad was at home then, and I used to babysit him a lot. So he was like my little boy.
Okay. Grandpa, have you ever been drafted?
I've been drafted so many times I couldn't remember. I started being drafted when I was 18, and I was drafted every 6 months until I was 26. And every time I go through the entire thing, going down to the draft board, and they would go through the whole situations they put you through, and at the very end they would weigh me, and they'd say I wasn't heavy enough. They also found out during that time that I was colorblind, and I thought, oh good, I don't have to go into service because I'm colorblind, and they said, no, that's not a reason. If you're colorblind, you're really good in the front lines because you can look through camouflage. So that wasn't an excuse, but because of my weight, I weighed 92 pounds, and they wouldn't accept me for my weight.
Did you try to stay under 92 pounds?
I never made a big, I don't know, I really didn't have a problem staying under 92 because that was my normal weight. I didn't gain any weight at all until my wife had her first child. And then every child we had, I gained 10 pounds. Because she would be put on a special diet of protein, and whatever it was, the protein would make me gain weight. That was kind of an unusual thing in our life.
What were your feelings on the Korean War? How did you feel that?
Oh, I felt that General MacArthur.
McCarthy.
Arthur.
Okay.
He was doing a great job in Korea. He advanced our troops all the way up to the border of China, conquered all of North Korea, and then President Truman stopped him and wouldn't let him go any farther and fired him. And I feel that if he was to continue what he was doing, there would not be a North Korea today. There would have been a united Korea.
Well, but weren't they not allowed to cross China because China was threatening war?
China was already joining with North Korea at the time, and I don't think there would have been any problem with China because at that time our country was the only country that had the atomic bomb. And I think that we been strong enough, or wasn't. I think the thing it really hindered us in that war was being called a police action and being involved with the United Nations at the time, because they didn't consider it a war with the United States. It was a police action with the United Nations, and they were the ones that stopped us from going into China. I think that China was sort of backed right off at that time had we put up a strong stand, because we had already used the atomic bomb on the Japanese, and I think at that time almost every country in the world was scared to death of the United States.
And how did you feel about President Nixon and the whole Watergate scandal and everything?
Well, the Watergate scandal, I feel that Nixon had the right to do what he did. I think that the Democrats just blew that way out of proportion, because they were, at that time, the Democrats were accepting money from foreign countries to run their campaigns. And Nixon went to their place to find the evidence to prove that they were in the wrong by doing that. And he did find the evidence. But by him hiding the fact that he did it, which at that time he was the president, and I think he had the right to do what he did. I don't think that it was all a political scandal that was set up by the Democrats that made him, and because he was trying to cover up, I think that's what forced him out of office. I do feel he was doing the right thing. And I think Nixon, when he was in office, did accomplish a lot of things.
Okay. What was the country's feel about the Vietnam War, do you think?
Most of the country didn't like the Vietnam War. It was kind of that we took it over from the French. The French left Vietnam and kind of we filled in the void there. And it just didn't make any sense. Nobody really knew what we were fighting for or about. And I think that was one of the only wars that we actually lost. Where the people were, it just didn't make any sense at all for that war for us to be in it.
Okay. So is that how you felt personally about it?
Yeah. And I felt though the troops that came home from the Vietnam War were treated very badly because they weren't given a welcome home like most troops get. They were almost shunned when they came home, and I think they all felt that.
Okay, what was segregation like? Like, when you went out to places, did they have separate restrooms or separate sitting areas?
Not around Detroit. Down in the south it was that way, but we never went that far south. But the blacks stayed with the blacks and the whites with the whites, even though in Detroit there wasn't that type of segregation. The blacks were allowed to ride in the buses any place they wanted to. And that's why when the northern blacks went to the south, they would get into a lot of trouble. Because up here they were free to do a lot of things that they weren't in the south. I never had any bad experiences with any of the black people that I knew. They all seemed to be very good workers, and I worked with black people, and we just got along very well.
Were there people who treated black people very badly?
Well, the fellow I worked for did not treat the blacks the same as he did the whites. For instance, he would not pay a black person the same pay scale that a white fellow would make. Even though the black would be doing just as much work and just as hard work, he would always keep the black person's wages less. And he was Jewish, and he would watch over the Jewish people more than he would even the Christians, for instance. The Jewish people were kind of in a, I don't know how to say it. They had a syndicate, more or less, that they would operate in. And if a Jewish person needed a job, they would make sure that the Jewish person got a good job.
Okay.
In the syndicate that they ran. I worked in Gallup Printing, which was run by a Jewish syndicate. It was actually many companies together, but they treated me very well. I could not say anything bad about the Jewish people, and the ones I worked for, I was treated very well. As given a job as a manager of the plant. And I enjoyed my job working there. And
Okay.
really enjoyed working for Mr. Gallup.
Grandma, what was segregation like for you?
Well, the blacks stayed on their side of the fence, and we stayed on ours. And I lived in Hazel Park, and at that time there were no black people at all in Hazel Park. And I don't think we hated the black people. It's just that we felt they should live in one area and we should live in another. And they just didn't mix. Like Highland Park now later, the black people filled in Highland Park from Detroit. They came up from Detroit into Highland Park. But for years and years, we never had any in our city, Hazel Park. Not that we hated them, it just was, we were different. We were different. They were black and we were white. And we did what we did and they did what they did. And they weren't really mixed together.
Okay. How did you feel when they began to desegregate society? You know, schools, Martin Luther King.
Well, the first part of it was the busing. They started busing the black children into white areas and white schools. But I didn't think that it was too negative at the time. I don't remember being any big demonstrations against it, at least in around where we were. And we moved to Warren, and in Warren there was, just like Hazel Park, there were very few blacks. When we moved out here to Walled Lake, all I knew was one black family that was living out here. And my children associated with this black boy, and we used to even pick him up and take him to school in the morning. And they used to be in, they had a Christian organization in school, and they used to join with them in that organization, and he was treated very well by the whites. I don't think they felt anything against that boy at all.
Okay. So was that around when Aunt Marcy and Aunt Lorinda were children?
Yeah, it would have been when our kids were in high school in Walled Lake Western.
In fact, Candace, our granddaughter, went to the prom with a black boy.
Mm-hmm.
And really had a good time. He treated her very well.
Okay. And wait, so was Dad in school when they were still desegregating? Yeah, really? Oh, okay. Okay, what about the race riots in Detroit? Do you remember those?
Yes. The day of the race riots, we had taken a trip out to Lake Columbia where my sister lived. Spent the weekend out there, and on the way home, we came down the expressway in 96, and all of a sudden it was so dark that we had to turn our headlights on in the daytime. The whole sky was covered with black smoke. And as you were driving down the expressway, you could see fire all over the place. Buildings were burning all the way down the edge of the expressway. We came out to Hazel Park, and we stopped at a restaurant. And a black fellow came in, and he looked like he was scared to death. And his wife was working in the restaurant, and he told her to leave and come with him right then. And she said, well, I'm working. And he said, I don't care if you're working or not. You've got to get out of this area. And he took his wife and left. And it was right in the midst of the race riots. But then the National Guard was called out, and they brought tanks and all kinds of equipment down to Detroit. But then they advertised on the news that the National Guard weren't allowed to have any bullets in their guns. It seemed absolutely stupid that they made that in the news, so that all the people who were rioting and looting really didn't fear the soldiers, because they knew the soldiers didn't have any ammunition to shoot. And so they were involved in the race riots. The police were involved in the race riots, and they were looting as much as the people were. In fact, one of our neighbors was accused of looting during the race riot, and he had a home down in Hamtramck that he filled up with loot. And later on, his wife was working for us, and she even admitted that Johnny had been in the police force and that the police were looting along with everyone else.
Wow. What was the space race like for you guys? Landing on the moon.
I think one of the first things that kind of set fear in the hearts of all Americans was the sound of Sputnik. When Sputnik was circling the Earth, they felt that the Russians were so far ahead of us in space because they were the first ones into space. And that kind of got everyone together and said, well, the United States wasn't going to let Russia be first and get to the moon. And so Kennedy decided that he was going to make a trip to the moon, make it a national thing that everybody was working toward, was to reach the moon first, which I can't remember exactly. I think the Russians actually circled the moon first, but then we actually landed on it.
Mhm. What was JFK's assassination like? Do you remember when it happened and what your feeling was?
Well, everybody was just in shock. They just didn't understand what was going on. And there was a lot of things just before his assassination that saying that he shouldn't go to Texas. And he did go to Texas, and that's where he was shot.
How about you, Grandma? How did you feel?
Well, I thought he had all these bodyguards and all these people protecting him, and yet he was foolish to be in a convertible that wasn't closed up. And how he was shot is like from the air. And I thought, man, you can have all this protection, and yet you're really not safe in an open convertible. So I thought in some ways he was very foolish for what he had done. But we all felt really sorry because I think he was a very young president.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a wife and 2 children. It was very sad.
Can I ask you, you don't have to answer, but can I ask you what mental institutions were like when your brother, what year was your brother in mental institutions?
Yeah, I was about 20, I think.
So about the 1950s.
Yeah, it would be
1950s,
36,
1960s.
40, 50. 50 would be around 55.
Okay.
About 55. My brother was in a mental institution in Dearborn, and he was a paratrooper in the Army. And his boyfriend died on their first venture out as paratrooping, and that upset him very, very much. But he had a nervous breakdown, and he was considered schizophrenic, which meant that he had a dual personality. And one personality, he was very friendly, and the other, he was berserk. And he was on medication, and they tried shock treatments, which didn't work, and they didn't help him, but they were able to put him on some medication to keep him calm. At the time he was married, he had 2 children, which later his wife divorced him, and he came back home to live with us, and he was a good brother. And the thing he did mostly was he used to study the dictionary. And anybody that would be with him, he would give them a word from the dictionary. And a lot of my friends thought he was very, very bright and a very bright young man. But he did have his problems, and the mental institutions had locked wards. And I remember when I used to go pick him up, I'd have to go through the locked wards to get him to bring him out. And we used to pick him up on the weekends and bring him home. And never did anything bad, other than he never did get well. He was ill for many, many years until his death. I think he was 49 when he died, and he was probably 26 when he got sick.
Do you have any stories of what it was like inside the mental institution itself?
Well, they had like 2 wards. One was women and one was men. And they were separated. And Clinton Valley was the ward that I remember the most. I would go up there, and we would go and pick Sonny up about every 2 weeks. And we would bring him to our home. And he would really helped me out a lot. He would come out, and I sodded my yard, and he helped me put sod down. He used to call me a slave driver. But he would do all kinds of work around our house. He, when we go back out to the institution, I'd have to go in with him, both when we picked him up and take him back. I'd go into the wards, and the wards were in different buildings, and you had to go underneath the ground in order to get from one building to the other, and they were like catacombs, I guess you'd call them. They were like tunnels under the ground, and they were very confusing because they were poorly lit. And one day I had let Sonny off and taken him to his ward, and I was away back, and all of a sudden I turned the wrong way, and as you walk down through these dark hallways, you could hear the gates locking behind you. They would open up in front of you and let you through, then they would lock in behind you. And I made a wrong turn, and I was in the laundry room. And the gate locked behind me, and I'm standing in there, and I said, I want out. And all the other inmates that were in there, they said, you can't get out. And I said, well, I'm not supposed to be in here. And anyway, there was a button on the wall that you could push. You'd ring a bell, and I kept pushing the bell and pushing it, and finally I got some attention. And I think the only reason they let me out because I was dressed in a suit and tie. I didn't look like anybody else there. And my brother-in-law always told me, if you come to the mental institution, always dress up. Always be dressed with a tie. And he said, if you want to go any place in the institution, just carry a pad of paper with you. And he said, everybody will think you're an inspector or something and let you go anywhere you want. One time I was out at the institution, and I was walking through the ward, and somebody told me how I could get into the ward without going through all the locked doors. So I walked across the women's part of the thing into an elevator, which is a freight elevator that went up behind the wards into the pharmacy. I went through the pharmacy, and I walked in where the guard was. He was like in an elevated room above the ward where he could see everything going on, and he was in there just relaxing with his feet up on the desk. And I walked in behind him, and I said, I'm here to get Sonny. And the guy screamed and threw his hands up in the air and almost fell off his chair. And he says, how did you get in here? He says, I thought you were an angel or something. How did you get through the locked wards? So that was kind of thrilling for me to scare somebody like that.
Okay, in your opinion, what was the most important piece of technology?
Well, the first thing we remember is the telephone. And back then, you had party lines. And so you had lines that went to everybody's house in your neighborhood, and you could pick up the phone and listen to all the conversations going on and you wanted to. And in fact, there was one party line in our neighborhood where a boy met a girl on a party line and ended up marrying her. So there was different things that went on. Well, then after the telephone, we got the TV. And the first TV I ever seen was my brother-in-law's TV. It had a 6-inch screen, which is about the size of the screen that you got on your cell phone. But the size of the TV, it was like almost the size of a baby grand piano, real large. And it had what they called a wire recorder that recorded on a wire spool. It was before the tape ever came along. And it went from wire recording to tape to cassettes and 8 tracks. And all these things became obsolete until they got into the disc and CD-ROMs, and then DVDs, and then the Blu-ray, and all that was beyond that into the thumb drives. And all that technology we lived through. And we've seen it come and go and become obsolete. The computer was something that was really changed everything. Because after the invention of the computer, first our age knew nothing about it, but as our grandchildren would learn, my granddaughter Kathy, when she started in preschool, they had her on a Mac computer, which at that time I didn't even know what a computer was, and here they had a kid that wasn't even in kindergarten yet playing with a Mac computer at the school. And so anytime that we have problems with our computers, we had to go and talk to younger people like my grandkids. They had done a lot to teach me about the computer age.
I just taught you how to text.
Yeah, and she just taught me how to text on my cell phone. I got a cell phone, and people my age couldn't understand how I knew how to use it. I don't really know how to use it that much, but with the help of my grandkids, I know when I bought the thing, the guy had sold it to me and said, if your granddaughter teaches you something new about this thing every day for a year, you still won't know half of what the telephone can do.
What was the most fun thing, though, when we first got married was he had a tape recorder. And we go to parties, and he recorded kids talking. And it's really surprising what kids say when they think no one's listening.
Grandma.
And we could play this tape recorder back and just laugh about it. But it was a lot of fun to use at parties.
Okay, so in your opinion, what was the most important piece of technology in your opinion, Grandma, that happened in your lifetime?
I would say the telephone.
Because you can talk to people?
I think it was nicer when you could talk to people on the telephone. But now with the answering machines, when you call, you get an answering machine. Years ago, when you pick up the phone and say, "Hi, Kay, what are you doing?" And it was really, really nice. I loved the telephone.
All right.
I think one thing that's really changed too is how back then the telephone was so personal that you could almost pick up the phone and just ask for somebody, and the operator would know who you were calling. And the telephone numbers were so small. Like our number was 8026J. The J meant what part of the party line we were on. And the 8026 was actually the phone number.
Can I ask you how you've seen the roles of women change?
Well, years ago, I can tell you all about that. Years ago, women used to stay home, take care of the children, mind the house, take care of their husbands, and we used to go visit in the neighborhood and have coffee cliques and hang our washing on the line and visit with the neighbors. And the kids all got together and they played. And the kids played outside. They played outside in the yards. They used the lawns. They used the streets. But women were around. I mean, we watched over our household. Years later, when women's live and women thought they should earn the same money as the men, then it lowered the standard for the men. And the men weren't making the money that they were before, so women could stay home and take care of the house and take care of the kids. And so as women started working, then more and more kids got thrown into a nursery, and they both had to work to make the same money that years ago men made. Years ago, men could earn 3 times the money women could, so women would stay home and mind the house and take care of the kids. And I would say we did very well. Now today, it takes both men and women's wages to earn the same amount of money to keep the house going, and the kids are thrown to the babysitters. They're not taken care of by the parents, although there are a lot of fathers that feel they can stay home and take care of the kids and let the women work, because the women can earn higher wages for the jobs that they do. So the whole system has really changed. I don't know, I wouldn't say for the better, I would say for the worst.
But as being a home mother, did you ever get lonely, or was it ever?
Well, what we used to do, we'd have Bible clubs, and we'd have women's meetings where we would go to church and we'd take our kids and we'd take turns watching the kids so that women could gather together and have a fellowship. And that was what we kind of yearned for, because when you're home all day watching the kids, it gets very boring. But when you look forward to the fellowship time where you're with other women that have the same problems and the same, how do you say, tasks to do, it makes it kind of fun because you're competing with each other. Well, how did you clean your house today? What did you do with your kids? And it made it really exciting. And that took away a lot of the boredom of just being home all the time.
Okay. How about you, Grandpa? How do you feel the roles of women have changed?
Well, it's very close to what she said. All that the women's lib did was lower the standard of actually making money worthless. Because because women wanted the same wages as men, it didn't really change anything as far as the value of money. What happened is the money would buy less by having two people working than it required two people to work to make the same that a man used to make. And it wasn't that we just made wages. Men were also given wages plus bonuses. And sometimes the bonuses would outweigh your wages even. And your boss would kind of give you bonuses according to what your needs were as far as money would go. For instance, I had a fellow that we worked with, John Cross, who had 12 kids. Well, he was always getting large bonuses from Mr. Gelb because he knew he had 12 kids to take care of, and above his wages, Mr. Gelb would give him these large bonuses so that he could support his family.
Okay. Thank you, guys. That's about it.